Hello everyone, this is FIDE Master Viktor Neustroyev, and thank you for joining our workshop today. We are going to talk about pragmatic approach in chess. What does it mean and how this pragmatic approach helps us to win more games or to draw the game in that tournament situation that requires a draw. Well, is there anybody who attends this workshop for the first time? If yes, please let me know which country you are from and what's your current rating. It can be either chess.com ELO, FIDE ELO, just any national ELO, up to you. So that I can approximately understand the level of students. By the way, what other news I have? I'm working on a course for Chessable. This course is devoted to how to play Italian game with white pieces. And well, recently there was a very nice game played by two very strong grandmasters in the line that I'm analyzing and I'm going to include into my course. That game was played in Czech Republic against Yue, Chinese grandmaster Yue and David Navarra. And Yue defeated David without any problem. So that's why it only proves that black struggle in such a line, especially it doesn't really matter how strong that player is. Is it a club player or is it a 2700 grandmaster? Okay, so Brian is 1700 on chess.com. Perfect. Or Ida or Ida, how to pronounce better, Ida probably, if it's in English. So it's 825. Yes, perfect. So, and you're only 7 years old. Very good result. So you should be working on, yeah, you should work intensively and you have very good chances to be one of the top players of your state. By the way, which state are you from? I have students, well, I have students from Kentucky and from California, as well as from, well, Eastern seaside. So, okay, VA means Virginia, right? So, well, I also have, yeah, Virginia, thanks. Yeah, I have students from Maryland. Okay, fine. Perfect. Well, let's wait for more people to join, at least for a couple more minutes. What we are going to, well, yeah, so what do you have to remember about a pragmatic approach and what does it mean? So today it's a very specific webinar. Well, it's actually a workshop, but it's a very specific because if before we were trying to improve your ability to play chess better, so to to visualize positions better, to understand the position. This time we are working on approach to a chess game. So first of all, you should understand that the strong chess player is not only a good tactician, not an expert in the end games or openings. Chess player usually has to play against other advanced and well-prepared sportsmen. And that's why it does make sense to increase chances to win the game. How? Well, first of all, you should base your strategy depending on your individual skills. For example, you can choose that type of the positions or choose that openings which are comfortable for you, even if they do not offer a significant advantage. So, for example, it's common knowledge that like, well, e4, e5 positions are drawing, but I still play e4. I still play. I know that if it's the engine playing against me, the engine can equalize definitely and then defeat me. I know that. So there is no that. But I still play e4, e5, and knight f3. Why? Because I'm comfortable with these positions. What else? So you should also take into account skills of your opponent. Okay, fine. Skills of your opponent. You should play the openings where he is uncomfortable. For example, if he doesn't like attack, when he is under attack, you should attack, even if it's not the best way to play. And also, you should take into account his psychological condition. What else? Well, you should take into account the current tournament situation. For example, if you are leading, but you see that there are some players that are going to catch you. So it does make sense to make a draw in the next round, and your opponent's gonna take extra risk in order to play and try to catch you, and they may lose, and this is how you increase your advantage over them. Also, if you're playing a match with like 12 games, so it doesn't actually matter how many. And for example, you see that, well, in a classical, with a classical time control, you are worse than your opponent. But when it comes to blitz or rapid, which usually is a form of decision who is a better player. So usually when you play a tie break, it's either rapid or blitz time control. And if you want to play in the tiebreak, like Magnus Carlsen did, you can play such type of the openings which guaranteed draws. You remember, for example, Magnus Carlsen was playing against Fabiano Caruana in London. That was a world champion match, and Magnus drew all the games and successfully defeated Caruana during tiebreak because he's better rapid and blitz player. Okay, and if you see that in a tournament situation, you don't really need a win and draw is fine, it does make sense uh, to quickly make a draw and have time to recover your condition for the next game, as well as not reveal your opening preparation. So otherwise, the pragmatic approach in order to achieve the goal that you want, I mean, in the form of a pragmatic approach, you can use any means. So anything that, in your opinion, increases your chances to win this concrete game or increases your current tournament situation. And we are going to start with the explanation of the game between Boris Spassky, who unfortunately died a few days ago at the age of 88, against David Bronstein. So yeah, I'm sharing the screen. I'm also doing a stream on YouTube, so everything works perfectly. If there is any delay, please keep me updated. Okay, thanks, Brian. Actually, yeah, before we start, Brian said some important things that will work at club players level. Sometimes playing quickly can cause an opponent to make a quick decision and not take the proper time. Exactly. So, well, it doesn't work against me because if I see my opponent is playing quickly, I understand it and I will play at that pace, which allows me to find, if not the best, then optimal moves. And sometimes playing a weird opening like advancing the H pawn in a Sicilian line or against the Grunfeld in the very beginning can intimidate the opponent. That's true. Good point. Okay, so if the quality is okay, let's continue. So well, in this game, Spassky was playing against Bronstein, and Bronstein was known as a master of combinative play. So he liked attacking, he liked tactics, but he didn't like to defend his position. So he could hardly survive against a strong attack on his king. Well, nobody likes it, but you have to learn how to defend your position if your opponent decides to initiate the attack. And Spassky, who usually doesn't play such a specific semi-sound opening like King's Gambit, this time decided to play it because he thought that with e4, e5, and d4, he's likely to obtain initiative. It's not the best way, but his opponent would have to defend his position and wouldn't be able to illustrate his best skills as a chess player. So his attacking skills and his ability to play tactics. So. f4, he takes f4. Knight f3, d5. So, well, it's a common move, actually. E takes d5. Well, they don't take it immediately. They play bishop d6. Okay, so there is a question by Peter in Fischer versus Spassky. What were their two styles? Well, I don't think that, well, they did, of course, all these strategies. They wanted to draw the game when, after, for example, after a win, they wanted to draw the game, but they played the whole arsenal of different strategies, but I think they were showing their best skills and they were trying to play the position where they are best, not that strategies that were uncomfortable for their opponents. Only this, which is comfortable for themselves, mainly. So, well, Fischer was good almost at everything, well, as well as Spassky at that time. Okay, so knight c3 defending here, knight e7, d4, castle. Well, Spassky was probably better than Fischer in his attacking skills. Fischer was better in everything else. Bishop d3. So, well, yeah. So Spassky was also good with combinations and attacks. So this is a very common King's Gambit position. Well, they sacrifice the pawn. They are now going to win it back with knight b6. But before doing this move, they decide to play h6. So what do you think? In this position, well, h6 is played wide. Well, to stop knight g5 or to be able to play g5 with the pawn and save the pawn on f4. What would you do in this position? What do you think? Well, knight h4 going to f5, but this is how you just exchange the knight, and I don't think it provides you with advantage. If you think that you can take on f4, well, you probably take, but you can also win this pawn by doing something like that. What they played. Okay, so White finished their development and they started the attack right away, not allowing our opponent, no, I mean, not allowing Bronstein to realize his original plan. Knight b6, knight takes d5. So knight e4. What's the purpose of this move? Capturing there and winning there, and then taking advantage of the weakness on d6. What they have to do? Well, it seems that they don't really have a choice and they took on d5. c4, attracting the knight to e3 taking on e3, and now this pawn is a weakness. But should we capture it right away, or what would you suggest? Knight takes d6. Well, it's a good point if you have a dark squared bishop. Then you can attack this pawn. But if you open this file, you let him to defend a3, at least for a while. So that's why here Spassky plays a really great move, c5, adding pressure on d6. Well, a3 is very slow in this position, but c5. So the bishop has to retreat. Where? Well, if here, then g3 even. So he goes there. The e file is overloaded. The position of the bishop is restricted. And now we can initiate the attack. We can capture this pawn, but it's better to capture this pawn and at the same time create a battery to threaten queen h7. Rook e8, queen d3, and in this position they decided, well, what they can do. Well, knight f6 maybe. No, knight f6 is a blunder. Then knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen h7. King goes there, and I think it's a losing position because you can continue with just this move. Well, not fully losing, but white is definitely ahead. Maybe this is the move to threaten a check and then to take on e3. Maybe there was a better way to play. Yeah, I think there was. At least you could try this move, adding more pressure on f7. Because one of the ideas can be to capture on f7, deliver checks from there, take advantage of the fact that the knight is pinned. So, for example, if let's say something like bishop e6, you can increase your like pieces activity on the king side and still continue. As for knight of g5 here, I don't see the point, because let's say you do like that, and what are you threatening? You are threatening to take with a rook? Okay, fine. Probably he does bishop e6 move. So what, knight h7? I don't think it works. They will not take. And if you take, let's say, on f6, like I said originally, then bishop takes this, and what? So he escapes. So black decides to play e2. Why e2? Because such a move forces the queen to take, for example. And then maybe they can play knight f8 and try to take advantage of the pin on the e file. So I'm not fully sure, because I think that the best way they could play is knight f8 right away. This is where the knight would successfully defend h7. But you remember I told you Bronstein was a good attacking player, but he experienced struggles with defense. That's why instead of defending his position properly, equalizing it, and only then playing for a win, he played e2 like he is playing like an aggressive and attacking chess player. So what do you think white should continue with? Well, rook f2 makes sense. I agree. Also, objectively, it could make sense just to take this pawn right away, and there is nothing wrong with it. So knight f8, like was originally planned, and then the rook ad1 protecting there. So there is no discovered attack. If let's say f5 is played, well, first of all, you may retreat. Second, you can play knight e5 and sacrifice, but we will talk about it. Knight g3, then if they decide to create a discovered attack, they simply blunder their bishop because we have queen c4 check. But also knight e5 works. How does it work? For example, they take, and then we have knight f7. The queen has to move. Where? If d5, then bishop b3 and discovered attack. So d7. But still bishop b3. And king h7, for example, fails. Well, bishop b3, we create a threat of a discovered attack. And if king h7, well, if knight here, queen e6, adding more pressure. And if this move, what would you suggest? Yeah, just queen e4 is okay. Queen e4, g6, knight e5, and you invade the enemy camp. So for a grandmaster, it's not so difficult to calculate. For a club player, if you cannot calculate it, just after f5, play knight g3, and well, knight e5 after that. It's also fine. So queen e2, actually quite possible. Rook f2 was good too. Rook f2 is okay. So then knight f8, you can take it with your rook, or you can bring the other rook and take it. So white still has a domination. And black, usually in King's Gambit, black has extra pawn to compensate the white's activity. Well, not often it's possible, but sometimes it is. But this time they don't have it. This time they don't have, they lose the pawn on e2, the material becomes equal, and then white just has a strong domination. Knight e5 may work here too, I agree. So in the game was John's spectacular knight d6 move. It's not the best way, to be honest, but that was really nice and spectacular. What's wrong with it? So who can tell me what's wrong with it? Oh, well, as I told you, Bronstein didn't defend the position well. He wasn't just a good defender, but there was a possibility for black to defend. And I want you to suggest such a move. So what this move threatens? This move threatens with this and with this. Let's say they take our rook and we obviously take with our other rook. How they can defend the position? Well, most of you suggest knight f6, but I don't see how knight f6 works. Let's say knight f7. Well, knight f8 was a good move. Let me explain it too. And bishop d6. Yeah, I think John is correct. So knight f7. Then how can they play? Let's say they take. Well, if they move it, no, if they take, they lose. So if this, then knight e5. Yeah, well, bishop b3. What is better? Knight e5. King f8, bishop b3, and knight g6. The game is over. So, well, even knight d5 is not possible because of the pin. If the king escapes there, it's still the same story. And after king h8, knight f7 or knight g6. Well, what works better? I think knight g6 works better because it's checkmate. Knight f7 only wins a queen. So knight g6, king h7, knight f8, king h8, and then you do this. It's not the end. So they take with a knight, and then only knight g6 delivers checkmate. So knight f6 doesn't work well. Knight f8 works better, but still loses with knight f7. Knight f7, well, and they have issues. If they take with a king, it's a discovered attack, and well, same story. This time, I think you can take on f8 and invade h7. For example, king g8. Who can tell me how we checkmate in this position? There is rook f8, which I originally wanted to play, but now I see that there is a better way to play. Knight f7, knight h6. Oh, Peter, yes, and Arush is correct too. So queen h7, knight takes, and then the same story with this bishop b3. Blocking it doesn't make any sense. So king moves, knight g6 mate. Same checkmate. So knight f8, knight f7, the queen has to move, but after the queen moves, let's say to d7, it's still bishop b3 and serious issues. After this move, well, then knight h6 works. G takes, queen invades, moving the knight under a discovered attack isn't a good idea. Moving the knight to h6. Well, you can play knight e5 already. Yeah, you can play knight e5. You even don't need to capture this pawn. But you may. If you want, you may. And then play knight e5, threatening with checkmate on f7. Well, queen d4, king h1, and there is still checkmate on f7 that they cannot avoid. Well, if you think that they can capture there, yes, actually, then you take here and the position becomes winning. So king moves there, let's say queen is 7, king moves there. Well, I don't know what is better, rook f6 or bishop c2. It's a winning position. Fine. So knight f8 doesn't work neither. So, but what works? Bishop simple, bishop d6 works. How does it work? Well, it's definitely unpleasant. And this is what Boris Spassky had in mind when he initiated such a combination. He thought that it would be really hard for Bronstein to play bishop d6 move in this position because after that, there is only well, there is only one extra rook, but the attack is strong because now they have to sacrifice a piece. And well, yes, they have to sacrifice the piece because if they escape, then we can capture the rook on e8. So they have to sacrifice a knight. You cannot take it because of the queen, but if queen g7, then you can take it. And probably this is where he stopped the analysis and decided that the attack is decisive. So for, well, this is the next move, and this next move guarantees that black will be only 2 points up, and well, it doesn't compensate such an attack. But actually it could work if he plays properly like that, queen h6 and bishop e6. Now the king is relatively safe. Something like that allows the king to escape back here. Or, well, this is not enough. The attack is very slow, and probably the best way is just to continue and repeat the position. King e8 is not an option because bishop a4. So what they have to do is to keep playing these moves. The king cannot go to the d file because of that. So this is how the game would be a draw, but he just realized that somewhere here the attack is really strong and he doesn't continue the analysis. It was really hard to visualize it. And this is what Boris Spassky was hoping for, that black won't play that line where they had to stay in the passive defense. They would prefer to play aggressively. And yes, they did play aggressively. They played knight f8 right away. Knight f7. So e takes f1, rook takes f1, and we have the same position. They also continued with bishop f5, but it doesn't help. So why bishop f5? To block the f file. But how does it help? So it only makes sense if you then offer an exchange of the queens. But in this position, well, it's just, well, black has just a very little material advantage, but the positional advantage here favors white, of course, because of their attack. So what do you think you could play here? Okay, so yes, I'm also watching your comments on YouTube. So Eric suggests knight h6. Erosh also suggests knight h6. Well, guys, it's quite aggressive, but does it really win? Then bishop b3 probably. King h8, queen f5, king h7. And then what? So not 100% clear, and you sacrificed more material. So queen h5. Well, Brian is almost correct. It was queen f4. So to keep the queen on that file. Bishop f6, and the knight goes to e5, defending the other knight. Queen e7, bishop b3. So having the knight on f7 stops king h8 move. And on h7, the king is more vulnerable. So white has multiple threats. Some of them are mating threats. That's why black decided to take. They got knight takes e5 with a discovered attack. What now? So if the king goes to h8, we can take there and then play knight g6. No, it doesn't work. And we can just move the queen there and threaten with knight f7. This is what works. Or we threaten with this and then knight g6. Yes, exactly. Because if we play the move that I originally suggested, then they capture with a rook, and after this move, king h7, knight. No, wait. They take with the queen. Yeah, this is what I didn't like. Knight f8, rook f8, this. So it's just one pawn to compensate exchange. It's not a winning position for white. It's even better for black. Does knight f6 work? Knight h6. No, it didn't work so well. So here, just king knight h8 is not possible because we can simply retreat to e4 and then threaten with knight f7 as well as with rook takes and knight g6. But in the game, it was king h7 played, and after queen e4, it's still time to resign. Why? If he does g6, it's rook f7, winning a queen, so bishop takes. If knight takes, we can take it. If this move, then we can take there. So and this over. So after queen e4, David Bronstein resigned. So this is how the white strategy, the white's pragmatic approach to this concrete game helps Boris Spassky to score a win without any issues in 23 moves only. Okay, let's talk about knight h6. In this line, there was knight g5, rook f7. So knight h6, g takes h6. Bishop here, this, queen moves, king h7, knight g5, bishop g5. But you have your queen hanging, so you cannot play rook f7 because, well, they lose their queen, but you lose your queen too. So that's why it fails. Well, if they take with a pawn, it works. But if they take with a bishop, you're in trouble. So that's why knight g5 didn't work. Okay, fine. So those of you who play King's Gambit as a main opening, you can use choose this game as a model game.
If I could ask one question, on my earlier comment, if black can maintain that pawn on f4 and with g5, yeah, isn't that a strategy for black
Well, it's a
to
good
try to
strategy for
maintain?
black. So g5, h4, and I don't think that they can maintain by playing h6 or f6, but they can do this, and this is a bit unpleasant. So knight g4, knight e4. Because if you don't play knight g4 in time, d6, and then what?
I play it a lot, so
So yeah, this strategy with g5 is one of the most dangerous one, but actually it's dangerous for both. And if white is better prepared, if white knows these nuances, probably he has advantage. There is a time for bishop c4 line, so you mean bishop c4 in this position. G4, knight f5, queen h4, king f1. Well, I don't know the line, but I think that they can even sacrifice on f7. So this, then maybe bishop c5, threatening mate. And if queen e1, you can play actually g3, threatening with queen h2, rook takes, pawn takes, and then you promote. Yes, after g4, it's possible to castle. This is also one of famous lines. Sacrificing a piece and trying to tactically find the compensation because of better development. It's possible. Let's continue with the second game. So that was a that was the game between Alexander Grishchuk against Levon Aronian, and it was a candidate tournament. So here Grishchuk's task was not to lose. Yeah, hi Zamfir, thanks for joining. Brian, I agree with you. Yes, King's Gambit is fun and does get good results against club players, as well as Evans Gambit. And Evans Gambit is good even against stronger players. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, b4. So if you want to play aggressively, if you like gambits, then I would recommend you doing this, b4 move. Or at the very least, do Max Lange attack. Well, so among these three options, Evans Gambit, Max Lange attack, and King's Gambit, the King's Gambit is the worst. But it's better than any, well, that some other gambits, and at club players level, it definitely deserves attention, and you can play it. In that game, so this is actually not an interesting game at all, but I would like to, yeah. Okay, so let's go through this game, and then I'll tell you about Stafford Gambit. So this game was actually quite boring. It's not something that should be illustrated, but we are interested in this game because White was able to achieve what he wanted, and he wanted a draw. So against Levon Aronian, he wanted a draw, and then there was a chance to play the tie break. Where Grishchuk is actually a better blitz player. So, Grishchuk, I don't remember if he was a world blitz champion, but he's always, well, maybe 10 years before, he was always at top 5, top 10, and now he's still a very strong blitz player. And that's why he wanted a draw to play tiebreak then. So he actually, in that tournament, with such a strategy, he defeated Aronian and then Kramnik. He only struggled with such a strategy against Boris Gelfand. But actually, Grishchuk is a better blitz player than Boris Gelfand. Anyway, so let's just do the analysis. So what White wanted? White, I mean Grishchuk, knew the opening repertoire that Levon Aronian is going to play and decided to choose the most safe strategy that he could only find. So he played d4, d5, c4, e6, queen's gambit, knight e3, bishop e7. So bishop e7 stops bishop g5. C takes d5, e takes d5, bishop f4. This is the most solid way to play against Queen's Gambit. So Carlsbad with bishop f4. Black has just a fewer chances to make the game more complex and at the same time not taking extra risk to lose the game. So there winning options are limited. C6, E3, bishop F5, knight G2. Why? The knight goes to G3 to chase this knight bishop away, and also the bishops can be exchanged, and the knight on G3 does a very strong defensive function. Well, it's not very soft, but it's just Carlsbad. Knight D7, knight G3, bishop G6, bishop E2. Well, bishop D3 was also possible. Knight goes to B6. Rook C1, well, to cover the C4 square. Knight F6. How to play? Well, white plays H4. This is looks like aggressive move, but at the same time, black can successfully defend their position. So H6, H5, taking more space. This. Now these bishops are exchanged. Castled. Knight F5 was played, so invading the enemy territory. They defend with Rook E8. And here the game continued with F3 move. Why F3? It stops any knight E4, any knight G4, anything. Bishop F8, successfully defending the king side. And just king F2. And, well, white has chances to play for a win if they play G4, G5, but at the same time, this strategy contains some risk. But black has no strategy at all. So they don't have any chances to play for a win. Well, look at this position and tell me if black has any aggressive continuation which may allow them to get some winning chances. For example, what? Knight c4? No, knight c4 is b3, simply chasing the knight away. G5? No. En passant, and h6 is a weakness. Same thing with g6. Play on the queen side, but how? It can be always blocked with a3 before, and you may spend a lot of tempi there, but struggle after g4, g5. So good point. Yeah, knight c4 and then knight d6 to trade pieces. Okay, so let's say I play b3, knight d6. How can I play here? Well, I can do this because the bishop is not as valuable as knight, and then continue with g4. So yes, that was a good idea, I agree, but still, what then? So that was clever, exchanging the bishop or exchanging the knight. But knight h7, okay, fine. How can I improve my position? I can probably bring more pieces. Rook c8, c5, no, I don't think it works. Even if you can do it, d5 is a weakness. And, well, they can take on d6 anytime they want. So queen f6, fine. Knight f4 makes sense. Well, let me just bring the king to g2. Another thing I can do is b4 because you cannot take it. It's a poisoned pawn because if you lose b7, then you are in trouble. So it's possible to play, but there is no way to play for a win for black. No real chances. Only, well, hoping for the white's blunder, which is quite uncommon for such chess players like grandmasters, especially for Alexander Grishchuk, who was 27-15. So he made a draw, and their match continued in the form of a blitz game where he successfully defeated Aronian. So doing a defensive, well, not a defensive, but a solid setup, which doesn't allow your opponent any chances to play for a win, may actually favor you a lot. It may favor you a lot because of two reasons. First of all, because of the tournament situation. So, for example, you draw the game and you know that if it's a draw, then you play rapid or blitz, where you are stronger than your opponent. So you see that your opponent has, well, he has to play for a win, for example, because of the tournament situation, and your position is solid, which means that in order to play for a win, he is likely to take some risk and weaken his position, which you can take advantage of and win the game yourself. So that's why creating a solid setup may help you a lot. Okay, fine. What I wanted to tell you. Well, this approach nowadays is called as the Grishchuk's method. If you haven't heard it, probably it's because you're not interested in such approaches. But if you ask a strong chess player, for example, what is Grishchuk pragmatic approach, well, he would say that drawing with white pieces and then playing with a shorter time control. This is what Grishchuk first time invented. Fine. Now let me answer the question. First of all, I absolutely agree with Eric Petersman from, well, it's a comment on YouTube. You don't see it here. That Vienna game provides white with better chances than King's Gambit. That's true. So now we have Evans Gambit, Max Lange attack, Vienna game, and King's Gambit. And King's Gambit is the worst among these options. But again, so if you're a club player, it still works. But Peter, when you reach 2000, I think you should change your opening repertoire. They will defeat you at 2000 in King's Gambit. So maybe to Vienna, maybe to, well, maybe you will be interested in just playing slowly Italian game that I'm going to explain how to play in my next Chessable course. Fine. Let's talk about Stafford. So I don't think Stafford is a very good strategy for black. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight e5. Then typically it's d6, but if it's Stafford Gambit, they play this move. And this is where white is actually better. I did a webinar. I also created a short video which explains how you can take advantage in Stafford Gambit. There is a grandmaster who plays it often. No, he's international master. Brian, can you remind me his name? He plays it often, and he always, yes, Eric Rosen, exactly. Well, I analyzed his games. When I was preparing to that webinar, I analyzed his games. What can I say? He is always in a trouble with his pieces, and sometimes he wins, but he wins because of other reasons, not because he played a proper opening. He wins because his opponent blunders and something like that. So, but he has no chance against a strong chess player. I think he doesn't have any chances even against me if he plays Stafford Gambit. Because white plays simple moves, achieves advantage, and then, well, just one or two mistakes, and white loses the game usually. But if not, then white defeats him with no chances. So knight c6, you accept this gambit. D takes, D captures c6, allows black to speed up their development. Now you have to defend e4. Well, the vast majority of chess players here would continue with knight c3. Why? Because developing a knight is a good move, and this move is also defending the pawn on e4. But you have two options. You have knight move and the pawn move. And this time you'd better prefer a pawn move. Why? Because your goal is to play c3, d4 in future. However, remember the move order, otherwise you may blunder. So bishop c5, putting pressure there and threatening with this move. Doing c3 this time is a mistake. So you have to play bishop e2 to prevent knight g4, as well as to defend your queen with your bishop. Why? So if you, let's say, does this move, then he has knight e4. And if you take, they take on f2 and you lose your queen. Even here, you lose your queen. So bishop e2 first. They, well, according to Eric Rosen games, black usually plays h5 here. But c3, knight g4 and d4. And now they cannot use this bishop into the attack. And these two pieces are not enough. So for example, queen h4, g3, queen f6. Well, now it's up to you. Well, you can play f3, which is considered to be the best move, but you have to play accurately then. Or you can just play bishop f3, which forces them to retreat with the bishop and provides you with a domination in the center and one extra pawn. So I would play f3, h4, I take, they take, and then I play bishop e3. And this is enough to defend. So if he takes with rook g1, there is a defense. There is no way he can continue his attack. I'm threatening to take on g3. Sooner or later, I'm threatening to take on c5 here. So, well, bishop b6, let's say, where? Then maybe g5, maybe knight d2 just. Knight d2, knight f3, and what were we talking about? I also have knight f1 move. So it fails. So I would play f3. But if you don't know these lines, don't worry, just play this. That's why I figured out that instead of h5, they'd better play knight g4 first. It looks like a blunder, but actually it's a sacrifice. Okay, just let me quickly answer. G2, but what for? Are you going to play this move? I can totally ignore it because my G1 rook is already protected. So here, for example, I continue with knight f3. You can play rook h1, fine. And then with this move, my king is safe and I win the pawn on G2. You can even take here. I take there, you take, queen takes, and we shouldn't analyze this position anymore. White is completely winning. Instead of rook h2. Okay, good point. G2, rook g1 still. And what's then? So probably sooner or later, you have to capture on h2. And it doesn't make any changes. Okay, so knight g4. This blunder, which is actually not a blunder, but a sacrifice. So bishop g4, you have to accept it. Then queen h4 is a double attack. They threaten mate and they threaten the f2 pawn. So I came up with the solution that queen f3 is strong enough. You defend, and if they take, you offer a queen straight, which they have to accept. Because if not, there is this, there is that. So let's say this move, then you have this. If they take, look at the position. Yes, they have a bishop pair, but we have pawns and one extra pawn, and that will stop the enemy bishop activity. So that's why it's easy to defeat Stafford Gambit if you remember this move, d3 and bishop e2. The rest is simple. Don't forget about the plan of c3, d4 after that. So Stafford is definitely not a good way to play with black pieces. It only works for people who don't know. Well, if you think that this is a complicated analysis, I would say no, everyone can do such an analysis. What you need to do is when you lost the game in the opening that you don't, that you are not familiar. So, and if you think it was a specific gambit and you definitely need to learn, analyze it yourself or turn the engine and you will find all these moves. But choose more simple continuations, because if your opponent plays this opening, maybe he knows some lines there. So choose something more simple, something more solid, but which at least leaves you with small and stable advantage. Not obligatory small, but stable. Now let's continue with the next game. So it was a match between the World Championship match between Garry Kasparov, current world champion at that time, and a challenger, Vladimir Kramnik. And if you remember, Vladimir Kramnik defeated his opponent. So, well, what's the strategy for all World Championship matches? The strategy is obvious. Draw with black pieces and try to play for a win with white pieces. That's why Kramnik wanted to draw the game. So Garry, as usual, played d4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. And, well, Garry usually plays Ruy Lopez, so he did bishop b5. And Kramnik reacted with knight f6, the so-called Berlin defense. And well, nowadays we know that these are very drawing positions and we shouldn't play them with white pieces. So if I somehow play this position with white, I usually don't play because I use bishop c4 move. So I would play anti-Berlin with d3 move here. This is what I would play, but there are some people that who still like playing a Berlin with white, but it's really boring and the black's defensive potential is so huge. So castle knight e4 d4, this is the main line. You don't really need to learn it. I even don't recommend you to play it. I just wanted to illustrate that this approach allows you to score a half of the point or maybe a point in some cases when you really need it. So think about that. So if you want to draw the game, where you can draw it in Berlin. So for example, my friend and I decided to not play a tournament game, but agreed to a draw. So we decided to play Berlin line to make it so drawing, because you cannot agree to a draw in the very beginning of the game. You have to play some moves. So we decided to play Berlin line because it's a drawing position. Okay, so in one of my statements, I said that e4 is drawish. I said e4, e5 is drawish. So Italian game especially. d4, c4 are less drawish. Maybe d4. So c4, c4 is interesting if you are playing for a win, but at the same time it contains some extra risk. So I think that d4 and maybe some Catalan openings are quite promising, but even there, black can still equalize. So I think d4 positions are less drawing, but e4 positions are exciting, more interesting. So you feel a lot of pleasure, a lot of pleasure playing them. So that's why I would play so. So Kramnik that time, when people knew about Berlin system, about Berlin variation, but that time this line wasn't so popular, and both players had to do some home preparation to, well, black to prove that this is drawish, and white to prove that it's possible to play for a win. So knight c3, bishop d7, b3, well, boring developing of their pieces, bishop b2, king c8. This position nowadays is well analyzed too, but that time they, for example, Kasparov had to find himself which exact moves can provide him with advantage. So he played this, hoping to have this move in mind, b6, rook ad1, so that the king cannot escape. Knight goes back to e7. Now there is no need to play g4. So this knight goes there and knight g6. So white pieces are definitely better. But how to play for a win? This is the biggest issue. Knight e1. So what do you think? What's the purpose of knight e1 move? Do they want to push the pawn? I think it's more about the knight. So with such a move, white wanted to transfer their knight to d3 and think about doing c4, c5. h5, knight d3, c5, c4 to stop it. This bishop becomes worse, but still how to play. Well, a5 is aggressive move, and it threatens with a4 to capture on b3, to make the rook active, to make b3 weakness, because it's, well, after this move, we can play a takes b4 once black is better prepared. So black can play bishop b e7, then take, and once this rook goes to the A file, king b7 connecting the rooks. So if the exchange happens, then black captures with their H rook, bringing the rook to the active line. So A4, this is how white played in order to stop black activity. H4, grabbing some space and not letting the knight to go to G3, knight E3, bishop E6, knight D5. So looks like white has space, white has advantage, but again, black is black's position contains of a lot of drawing potential, so it's quite solid still. King goes there. So the goal is to play c6. Knight, that's why the knight escapes. Rook to h5 to add pressure to limit the knight or to limit the bishop. Well, bishop c3 was played, rook e8. Finally, f4 was played to defend the e5, but knight goes to e7, and they are still able to occupy these most important squares. So knight f2, knight f5. And this is how the game ended in a draw. No one can progress. Look at this position and tell me what would you play as white in this position if you wanted to play for a win, or if you see any ideas of how black can win. The engine thinks that there should be an exchange, after which it shows zeros. So what do you think? Try knight d5 again. Okay, good point. I don't think it's actually something really helpful. So knight g3, rook e1. Then I can pressure this pawn. So I'm going to take and take there. How you can defend it with knight d3? Ah, yes, but then how do you defend this pawn? If you move the knight, you lose on f4. So actually knight d5 doesn't look good. And it seems that capturing is the best way. Then maybe rook e1, maybe knight g4. So I would probably play knight g4 to settle my knight on e3. But again, I don't see how to play for a win. I even think that black can play for a win if they can bring the bishop to c2. So for example, if they initiate an exchange of rooks, both rook pairs should be exchanged. Well, so white has no active plan, and that's why the game ended in a draw. And black, Vladimir Kramnik, achieved his goal. So he wanted to draw the game with black pieces and then to play for a win with white. He couldn't win all his white games, but some he could. And that's why he won the match and became a world champion. So such a strategy works very well when it's a when it's just any kind of match against a player who is approximately of the same level or even a little stronger. And it also works well if you are playing in a strong tournament, even if it's an open tournament. So for example, like you were paired against like a player with rating within 100 from your rating. So with black pieces, it's okay if they draw the game. Well, you probably guys all remember Sergei Karakin. So nowadays, people know him as one of the main Russian propagandists. So he is declaring some statements pro-Russian statements against Ukraine. However, before that, he was a really good chess player. He's still a very strong chess player, but he doesn't play for many years and was disqualified for some time. But you probably know that some chess players called him a minister of defense. Why? Because in every game against top grandmaster, Sergei Kavakin was agreed. Well, No, he agreed to make a draw with black pieces against any grandmaster of the top level. But with white pieces, he wanted to play for a win. So this is his that was his playing style. So even if, well, what's his rating is now? I don't remember, 27 something. So if he played against like someone of his rating, or even a little lower, like 2650, with black pieces, he was satisfied with a draw, even if he loses some rating points. But he would catch these points with white pieces. And that strategy helped him to be one of the famous defensive players and one of the strongest chess players. Karpov is a good defender too. Oh, I cannot say so. I would say Karpov had a very good endgame technique, and he was good in the positional play. If speaking about defenders, I would say Fabiano Caruana is a good defender. Magnus Carlsen is good at everything, but yeah. Okay, fine. Well, speaking about Karpov, we have his game now. His game that he was playing against Ollie Jacobson. And that was an Olympiad. Karpov was the board one, playing for Soviet Union against Denmark. And well, his goal on the first board was to defeat his opponent, to offer a win for his team, and definitely not lose. And the draw is unfavorable too. So how to win against a lower rated player without risk? Take advantage of your strongest sides. So what do you think? Just try to guess a strategy for white. So Karpov is white against a player who is almost 300 lower rated than him, more than 300, and he needs a win without risk. Guess the strategy. So you can unmute yourself and say it, why not? Play English opening G4 is too risky. So tactical game. It's if you're a good tactician. But Karpov is a good positional player and endgame player. Yeah, John is correct. Positional game with the endgame edge. Right. So, well, and also you should understand that if, well, maybe it doesn't affect club players, but if these are top players playing for a team and they see that their leader is losing the game, their psychological condition becomes fluctuating and they may lose their games too. Of course, the result on the first board is not decisive for other players, but they definitely take into account. So, for example, they see, okay, our board one lost. It means that we cannot draw the games. We have to win. And if we have to win, we have to risk. And they may lose too. So that's why Karpov's task was to win the game without any chances for his opponent. So he should play the positions where he was better, and he was better with positional play as well as with the endgame technique.
Why?
Okay.
Why John's answer? Because you'd figure at 2400, a player would know endgame technique and every combination, rook and bishop versus and pawn, all the many different endgame variations or possibilities. So what?
Well, Karpov was known as a very good positional player. So he was stronger in positional play than many other grandmasters.
And there's a
So
difference in positional understanding. Well, that's his strength. I
yes.
understand.
So, okay, Peter, actually, good point. So a player 300 points lower will have worse visualization and worse tactical skills. This works for club players. But, well, for example, you, like a 1600 rated player, play against 1300 rated player. Well, yes, you're better in most chess aspects, and you will defeat him in a tactical game with no doubts. But 2400 rated player can calculate the lines properly, so he's unlikely to make a tactical blunder like a 1300 rated player. So that's why, even if this is a complicated tactics, the advantage of Karpov isn't so huge. So, but in positional play, he with so much experience that Karpov had, well, he would definitely be better than his opponent. And misunderstanding would provoke black to make mistakes. So, for example, Karpov understands what he should be doing, and Jacobson doesn't. And if Jacobson doesn't understand, he plays weird things, and Karpov, as a good positional player, takes advantage of it. So, if you're a better positional player, you should play positional game.
Would you say that the difference in general, between a 2800 player and a 2400 player is positional understanding?
It depends on the player. For example, like Sam Shankland, who is also one of the top grandmasters, he is a very good tactician player. So if he would play for a win against a certain player, he would prefer tactical positions. Yeah, and Shahryar Mamedyanov is another example of a tactician player. So, but if it was Fabiano Caruana, he would prefer to play in a positional way. Okay, anyway, so Karpov is better in positional play as well as endgame technique. So he chooses to play d4 because the positions are more closed and because this is more common to him. So it's the same opening like Grishchuk did. But this time, White decided to not play Carlsbad. They played knight f3, knight f6, bishop g5. So this opening castle. It's still not too late to capture, but e3 was played. Knight bd7, rook c1, a6. So this strategy for black I was playing when I was a young boy. So because my coach told me to play it. It's not the best strategy, but it's solid. And if, let's say, bishop d3 is played, which the vast majority of club players did at that level, at that time, then what do you think the black's plan is? So d takes c4, gain a tempo. D takes c4 and b5 is bishop b7, c5. So guys, all together you came up with a proper decision. It's d takes c4 to gain a tempo, then it's b5, the bishop retreats, there is no big difference where. For black there is no big difference. Bishop d3 is more logical, and if you play this move, they can already play e4. So c5 should be played right away, and bishop b7 can be played one step later. And this almost guarantee approximately equal position. For example, I don't know, castle. And here you can play bishop b7, well, I don't know, a3 maybe, or queen e2. And there is also this move, which allows you to equalize the position. It leads to exchange of the bishops, it leads to the exchange of the knights, and everything looks fine. Well, when I was playing d4 in this position, I was playing a3, waiting for this. This is how I could capture in one move. Then b5, bishop a2. And, well, if they play bishop b7, I played b4, stopping it. Again, it's not the best strategy because of a5 here. I also combined these ideas with bishop here and queen d3, threatening mate. But the best way was actually playing c5, and Karpov, of course, knew that. 94, equalizing. Now, I mean, trying to exchange pieces and make the position more simple. So knight takes, pawn takes. The pawn structure is a little ruined, but it's not a decisive factor. Bishop a7, queen a7, knight d2 attacking there. Definitely knight f6. Well, this would be riskier because of the problems on this diagonal. So knight f6. What do you think if you can play queen c2 and win the pawn? What's your opinion? Well, g4. Well, g4 I think fails. G4, how can they play? Maybe just h6 is enough. Oh, there is another move that I want you to figure out in case of queen c2, and then we will continue with g4. So queen c2, how black not lose their pawn on e4? Yeah, e5, simply e5. e5 with the idea to take. So knight e4, well, bishop f5 doesn't look so good. Because they take at least. But e takes d4 works fine. So if there is a pin and if knight takes first, which is a must, then after e takes d4, there is queen d4. I would first prefer to deliver intermediate check and only then capture on d4. But black is okay here. And they do not lose a pawn. So in case of g4, it's basically the same. Maybe you can play g5, but knight goes there. And it seems that the pawn is still poisoned. The pawn is still poisoned because of the pin. Even if you take with the queen, it's a strong counterplay then. And if h3, then knight f2 knight e3 looks good. So knight f2, king here, take there, and threatening with e3. No, well, this is where white may lose the game. So that's why Karpov doesn't fight for the pawn on e4, but improves his pieces. Knight goes to e5. It stops this, because after that, the pawn structure is ruined. That's why black plays queen e8, threatening, well, not threatening, but intending to play bishop c6. Bishop c4, bishop c6. This bishop is bad, and they want the knight to take, and if knight takes, queen takes, and actually black is fine. They can set a blockade on d5 if they want, so this bishop is a bit, well, a restricted piece. So queen c2, bishop d5, castle. They should, if they don't want to lose, they should set a blockade with c6, but they did bishop c4. Knight takes c4, queen c6. Knight e5 is a tempo, queen d5, and, well, the pawn is hanging, so b3. Queen e2, c6, finally it was played. White is just a very little better here, so knight e8. Queen c2, let me just show you the critical moment. So rook cd1, a4, because what else? So queenside activity. And in this moment, they played a kind of inaccuracy. So they played queen b3 move, and that was inaccuracy, and that led to approximately equal position. What do you think white should do instead here? So who can tell me? 95 back, but you were already there. So do you think it's a good idea? Well, you advance the pawns there on the queen side. What you should do? G3, 95, guys. Well, 95 is not bad. But what for? 95, rook b8. So then is correct. So rook b1. So what's the goal of such a strategy? Well, also sometimes we have a similar strategy which is called minority attack, but this happens when the c and e pawns are exchanged. But even this time it works well. So b5 with the goal to either open the file for our rooks for invasion, or b5 and trying to add pressure on the weakness on b7. This is so common. Well, if you are not a Carlsbad player, then you probably are not familiar with such a strategy. Please remember it. When you have space on one side of the board, you should, well, most likely a pawn march is a good plan then. Well, I was actually teaching it in my previous course, at our previous group, well, at our group classes. So we have group classes on Mondays and Fridays. And in one of the lessons, I was explaining that. However, on Monday, this group class will be over, and we are going to start a new course of group classes in the middle of March. And the topic will be how to attack and how to defend. So, for example, you see Spassky was successfully defeated Bronstein because Bronstein didn't know how to defend his position properly. In that course, during that group lessons, I will explain what are typical methods to defend your position, and how exactly you should attack and when, actually, because sometimes people start the attack and they don't really think that the attacking plan is the best plan. They just think that, okay, so if I attack, I'm closer to checkmate. But actually, sometimes attacking is a mistake, and instead you should play on the other side of the board. So I will announce this course soon, and I hope that you guys can participate there. Well, 96 and okay, 97 defense, true, but then 96. Rook b8, and still you can play b5. If needed, you can bring the queen. Anyway, it's either the b file gets open and you can invade into the enemy territory, or b7 becomes a weakness. So this plan would provide white with advantage. Karpov missed it. He played queen b3. Maybe he saw something here tactical. But knight c7, and looks like everything is defended. f3. Well, maybe he wanted to play this position. So taking with the g-pawn makes more sense. It doesn't expose the king enough, letting black to attack. It just exposes a little, but at the same time allows white to continue with f4. So f4, a counterplay. E takes f4. Peter, are you using ChatGPT or just Wikipedia?
ChatGPT. But
Okay.
yeah, I
Well,
don't like these.
ChatGPT, it's not the best chess player in the world. I wouldn't rely on ChatGPT in my chess games, for example, and well, so I don't think that we should. Well, if
It's
it was
terrible.
AlphaZero, I
It's
would use.
terrible at chess, but it knows like just general theory. But yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to say just in general, I don't. D4 seems very repetitive, you know, when I in my experience. I know it gets like it maybe it gets interesting around move 10 or so.
Mm-hmm.
You should take a look at some of Mamedyarov's D4 games. They're quite exciting.
Brian, and does Mamedyarev usually play Catalan?
He does play some Catalan. He plays a number of different openings, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember he was defeating Magnus Carlsen, and he was actually defeating. So, and I remember that my friend and I called called some other friends from California. And at that moment, there was Shakir Mamediyarov sitting with them and analyzing these games. And I could ask him, well, some questions regarding that game. So that time he was number 2. So the best among all chess players except Magnus Carlsen. Can we follow the course, please? You mean, can we follow the topic? Well, the game? Yeah, we will. Or are you talking about that course that about attack and defense? Okay, let's continue. So knight d6 was played here. Why knight d6? Well, capturing on e4 means you lose a pawn. Knight d6 means that you create a double attack and you so you captured one pawn. And now you're threatening to take the other one. And they are provoked to take on f3. Rook takes, knight d5. Well, if they take, you activate your queen and threaten queen f7. They probably play rook f8. So it was also possible, and the position would be still equal then. Then queen d3, maybe the queens should be exchanged. So knight d5 was played, rook f4, knight f4, and rook f1. And then black thought that once he simplifies, the complexity of the position is not enough to let white to play for a win. That's why he played queen d3. Now the queens are exchanged because otherwise d4 is unhanging. So it's also this. So even if queen b2 is played, it's just simply queen d4. Actually, if queen b2, I think you can play better like that. Fine. So the queens are exchanged. And how to win this position? Well, if you are a good endgame player, then you should provoke your opponent to make mistakes by using typical endgame methods. So a5 first. Why? Well, to stop this pawn and fix this pawn. Knight b4 doesn't work well. Not because of knight b7, but because you can activate your rook. So let's say knight c2, rook b7, knight d4, and temporarily they are even a pawn up, but after rook b6, they lose. For example, rook a8, and bring the king, chase him away, take this pawn. So it's just a temporary sacrifice, which allows white to activate his pieces and then restore material balance, and because of the activity of the pieces, play for a win. That's why rook d7 first, defending this. Rook b1 defending here. Now king comes to the place of action. Knight d5, rook b3. Well, rook b3 wasn't important. Knight goes that way, and yeah, that was a mistake. Why that was a mistake? Because now white has a chance to play rook e3 in order to capture the pawn on e6. Of course, black were ready for this move, and he thought that knight f5 would allow him to keep material balance. But the problem is that these pawns are far advanced, and just capturing the pawn on b7 will provide white with a winning position. So can he save this pawn in a different way? No, I don't think so. So knight d5 maybe again, but then rook e6, knight b4, and this pawn is lost. So you can do this, he escapes, and you can do that. Knight c2, take, this, and king e3. Yeah, king e3. So once the knight moves, the c6 is a weakness. And if you think that this is a possibility, it only allows white to progress with his king's march. So that's why knight f5 is the only way. If he doesn't want to play without a pawn, he has to take on d4. This, why? To chase the knight away and then go after the pawn. But they have no square, so this is unlikely to work. This is quite a bad position for the knight. They decided to play knight b5. This is what Karpov was hoping for. He took 8 takes b5, and now his king is in the center and his pawns are far advanced, and taking on b7 allows him to win the game. So it's still possible for an engine to draw the game, but not for a 2400 player. What do you think? How black should play? Mobilize the king. True. Rook d1, rook d1, king g6. Okay, so we have, well, your opinions, you're divided, and we have two options, king g6 and rook d1. So rook d1 is completely losing, and this is what Ole Jacobson played. Instead, king g6 could make more sense. It doesn't mean that he is not losing, but it gives him better chances. Here, I think Karpov would continue with a6, and after, well, yeah, so a7 and it's over. So take, rook checks, king goes to a5, rook c6, and rook a7. Well, I don't know who wants to stay in such a passive defense, but that was the only way for black to survive. Instead, black decided to keep their pieces active. So now this is, for example, a blunder, but this move is a blunder too. Why? Because a pawn in game is winning for white. That's why there is no need to play rook a7. We can first offer an exchange of the rooks. It's a winning in game because our king is just closer to the enemy queen side. Check, king a4, and this is a problematic pawn. So king g6 was finally played. So in this position, doing this move doesn't work so well. What's wrong with rook d7 move? Who can tell me? It's not a losing move, it's just not a winning move. Because of rook b1, but not rook b1 immediately, because rook b1 now allows the king to invade the enemy camp first, king f6. And if rook b7, then it's rook b1. The pawn is lost, and it's lost with a check, and then it's possible to locate the rook from behind. So, for example, this move, you take, chasing the king away, and then you continue with king e5. And after he takes, the c5 pawn dies. Also, there is a possibility to chase the enemy king further back. That's why a6 instead. Now, pawn captures, and he does this strategy. Again, bringing the king closer to the place of action would work, but maybe not enough experience, maybe some misunderstanding. He played this, king h5, another mistake, and now it's completely winning. So why? Because this guy is not doing much, and the c-pawn is promoted with the help of the king. So typically, if the king was on g1, rook c4 would be fine. Rook c4, then c6, b4. Finally, the white rook has to stay behind. They will push, letting them take, and the pawns would be exchanged. But not this time. This time, there is no need to protect this pawn with the rook. Instead, we can do it with our king. So rook b2, c6, rook g2, c7. Well, he played rook g5, but even if he did this move, king d6 and rook a8 is fine. It's enough to promote the pawn. Rook g5 was played, king d4. Well, king d6 is fine too, but king d6 probably, this is a problem. Still winning, but anyway. King d4, rook g4, king d5, and finally he goes to c6. This time, this is not a problem at all because of king b7 and the rook is protected. So rook g2. What would you play in this position to win without any complications? King b7, right? So there are no checks from behind, but even if they were, you could always block it. And if he decides to attack from behind, it's rook c6. So there is even no chance to sacrifice the rook for that pawn. The queen will be promoted anyway. So you see, so Karpov played with no risk, and he passed the game into a drawing game because he was unable to outplay his opponent positionally during the game. He chose an opening where positional play is a dominating factor, but wasn't able to succeed with the plan because he missed rook b1 move, I think. Rook b1 and the idea of b5. Maybe he saw something with queen b3 and then it didn't work so well. And then he passed the game to the endgame where he had to start everything from the very beginning. The position was completely equal, but because he has more experience, he knows more in endgames, he was able to defeat his opponent. This is how his approach worked. Okay, fine. So, well, we are done for today. However, before we leave, I think, well, first of all, if you like my webinars, you can always donate using this link and this button. Let me copy and paste it to the chat. So you can donate any amount if you have a PayPal account. It works easily. You just click this button, enter the amounts that you want to donate. Then this button again, it redirects you to PayPal, where you have to enter your PayPal account. And then you automatically send money to me. Okay, this is one thing. The second thing, we have a club on chess.com. So this is my profile, but oh, the link doesn't work. But I want to make it working. Maybe like that it will work. Yeah, it works like that. Fine. What else? Here we have a club on Chesslands that I kindly suggest you to join. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a tournament. So let me send you the link to join if you want, of course. So why is it working so slowly today? Yeah, this is a link. So this is the link to join. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create a tournament where your task is to play from a concrete opening. And this will help you to practice certain openings. For example, I think we can start with Sicilian. But if you have any other suggestions, you can always tell me. You can always email me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. And suggest the opening that you want to practice more. And we will organize such a tournament. Well, you see here, it's possible to, let's say, arena. And then here you choose, not here, setup book opening. And then you choose which opening. So tell me what you would like to practice. And if you are interested in such tournaments, I'm going to organize them. Maybe one opening per week. I think it will help you to practice more with the opening. I would love to play Italian game because I'm creating a course on it. So it can be interesting too. What else? So I think that next week, I mean, this upcoming week, starting from Tuesday, I think I will start streaming more. That's why you will get a notification, probably by email. There will be an announcement that I'm either doing puzzle rushes, puzzles, or just playing Title Tuesday. And if you want, you can always join and watch it. If it's a puzzles, you can always comment and suggest. If it's a Title Tuesday, then comments are disabled, and you have only to send some emotions or smiles. Fine. So we are done for today. This event was recorded, so you are going to receive the recording of this event tomorrow. There will be next webinar next Sunday. And if you would like to join our group lessons, you're welcome. I will also send a notification by email. So thank you for coming and hope to see everyone next Sunday.